The Commonwealth Observer Group heads to Nigeria for the upcoming polls. Uganda's health ministry fears more than 10 people could have contracted Ebola. And Egypt is hoping to be one of Libya's main reconstruction partners. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria's economy expands at the fastest rate since coming out of recession despite election jitters. And Somalia ropes in regional support to have its $4.6 billion debt written off. Of course, all that coming up within the program. Now it's back to Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, we start the program in Nigeria, where in just over a week, millions of Nigerians will troop to polling centers to elect a new president for the country. Officially, 73 candidates are running for office, but the election is effectively a two-horse race between incumbent Muhammadu Buhari of the ruling All Progressives Congress and his main challenger, Atiku Abubakar of the opposition People's Democratic Party. Both men are from the north of the country, so the issue of region, which is often a strong factor in Nigeria's politics, is not expected to play a major role this time, but there are other factors that could swing the vote either way for the candidates. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
With the two major political parties in the country allotting their presidential tickets to the north, something called zoning in Nigeria, it essentially means the next president of the country would come from the north, unless, of course, any of the other presidential candidates from other parts of the country is able to cause an offset, something that is very unlikely. So by all chance, Nigeria's next president will be either of these two men, Muhammadu Buhari, the incumbent, who is seeking a second and final term in office, and Atiku Abubakar, a former vice president of the country, who is seeking to fulfill a lifetime political ambition to govern Africa's most populous country. But men have been stamping for votes across the country, attracting huge crowds at their rallies.
Do you want to continue the poverty rate we have in this country? So, will you vote for APC? No way. Do you want to continue the unemployment rate we have in this country? Are you going to vote for APC? Never, never, never.
All we are trying to do is to remind you to think, where were we in 2015 when we came in? Where are we now? What have we been able to achieve with the resources available to us? They say they spent $16 billion, not naira, on power. Why the power? I am warning you, don't make any mistake of choosing any PDP candidate. What they will try to do is to cover the theft they have committed against the nation.
While both candidates are from the north, they have picked their running mates from two different parts of the south of the country. And that's mainly for the strategic reason of appealing to voters in those regions, which is a crucial factor in elections in Nigeria. Buhari's running mate and current vice president is from the southwest, while Abubakar's running mate is a former governor from the southeast.
A lot of people will expect of the opinion that if the Alhaji Atiku Abubakar had taken his running mate from the southwest, it's a strong candidate from the southwest, he would have been able to divide the vote, you know, because the southwest being a strong base of the ruling party. And then also, if you look at the voting population on both sides, southwest and the southeast, then the voting population in the southwest is more than that of the southeast.
With Boko Haram on a seeming resurgence in Nigeria's northeast, carrying out attacks on military bases, security is becoming a big talking point on the campaign trail. So too is the economy, which is still fragile but recovering slowly. While these issues will show a way on the decision of some voters in determining how they vote on election day, for many, it will boil down to their perception of the two candidates.
There are factors that I consider very important. There may be other minor factors, but the most critical is the people themselves, the electorate. They will determine the outcome. People troop out en masse and ensure that they vote and allow their vote to count. it may lead to a positive development on the side of the people, because that will manifest the mandate of the people in choosing leadership. And so that is a very critical factor. The second factor in Nigeria, which I know, is umpire, the INEC. The INEC has a role to play in the outcome of the election. If they conduct free, fair, and credible election, of course, it is a positive development for our electoral process.
The political atmosphere in the country is really charged up. The coming election is very crucial, both for the APC, which is seeking to consolidate its hold on power, and the PDP, which is seeking to stage a comeback after its defeat in 2015. In a matter of days rather than weeks, we shall find out who the people of this country have decided to pitch their tent with. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, former U.S. President Bill Clinton has been invited to Nigeria ahead of the elections. The visit is set for the 12th and 13th of February and is part of an initiative by a local organization that is pushing for free and fair polls. The National Peace Committee has organized what it terms as the National Peace Accord, where the former President of the United States is expected to deliver a keynote address. The Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Patricia Scotland, is also expected to attend. The event is aimed at getting candidates to commit to a peaceful and smooth transition of power in Nigeria. Well, for more on Nigeria's elections, we're now joined by our correspondents. In Abuja, we have Phil Ihaza and, of course, Deji Badmos live with us in Lagos. Deji, I want to start with you. Let's talk about this peace accord. It definitely sounds like a very noble gesture, but indeed securing peaceful elections is often easier said than done. Just talk us through the details of this peace accord and whether or not it's likely that all political parties will indeed sign.
Well, Beatrice, this is not the first time that the peace accord actually will be signed. We had one in 2015, just before the election then. And as a matter of fact, there was another accord signed just in December this year, actually. All the candidates signed up to the accord, and of course that accord was by the National Peace Committee. So this is just like the final peace accord before the election proper. Now, the one that signed in December of 2018, almost all the candidates signed. President Buhari signed, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar also signed. So this is the final peace accord, and basically the idea is to commit the candidates now to ensure that the elections are free and fair. So they are committing to free and fair election, that their campaigns will be clean, that they would not in any way incite, by their speech now, incite violence or cause people to resort to violence, that they would avoid any form of hate speech, any use of religious and ethnic incitement at all, that all of that would not be part of their campaign, and that they're committing now to the final results announced by the Independent National Electoral Commission. That is if, of course, the elections are judged to be free and fair. Of course, you know, the accord does not abridge the right of anyone at all who feels aggrieved to head to court. And let me just make something clear, Lindy. This accord is not a binding accord. This is just like a gentleman's agreement that the candidates are all committing to. It's an initiative that came up in 2015, and the body that is responsible, headed by a former military leader of this country, is continuing with that process. And it's something that all the candidates have actually applauded, and they're all committing to. Lindy?
Well, let's look at that a little closer. As you say, it's a gentleman's accord. And I want to come to you, Phil, on this issue. Just how much faith is this peace effort inspiring in voters across Nigeria? Let's look particularly at youth. Some say they're vulnerable to being encouraged to engage in conflict or violence during election times. Is there a sense that the young people themselves are going to work towards mitigating any conflict and violence during this election?
Well, thank you, Lindy. Like you said, it's easy for the youth to be vulnerable you know, to attacks or rather to incite violence during elections and even after elections. But I'd like to take it from 2015, for example, where, like Deji put it, a gentleman agreement. Imagine what would have happened. A lot of critics and analysts have said that if the leaders in this point now, the former president Goodluck Jonathan didn't go through with the peace accord by conceding to the announcement, the defeat by the electoral body, imagine what would have happened, you know. I'm talking about the reaction now from various youths and you know, youth bodies all over the country. So in answering that question, I'd like to say, first of all, that the leaders, the political leaders, would have to, you know, take the lead by following all the guidelines, all the instructions, all the agreement to maintain peace, whatever the situation is. That way it is easier for the youths in different parts of the country to also follow suit because they are supporters, they are also involved in the process, but they are also looking to ensure that, you know, the guidelines are also followed by their leaders. And secondly also is the fact that the information has to be properly disseminated. There has to be proper awareness, there has to be engagement with the youth this time, not so that the agreement is not isolated by just the figureheads of the parties now, the main opposition and the ruling party. I'm talking about engaging the youth as well, because the leaders might not, you know, incite violence directly, but their body language can also encourage the youth to be a part of it.
And just talk a little bit more about that, Phil. I want to stay with you. We know, of course, that there's 73 candidates vying for president, but ultimately this is a two-horse race. When it comes to youth participation, however, are there any young people that are going to, in some way or another, make a mark during this election on the country's political landscape?
Well, definitely, I would say yes. The youths are going to be making a huge impact, making a mark in the forthcoming elections, because for the first time in Nigeria's history, we're seeing, you know, the bill, the not too young to run bill signed by the current administration, the President Buhari administration. But that came after several months of, you know, campaigns, protests, movement by, you know, collaboration or a coalition of youths all across the country, so that we can see more inclusiveness of youths even down to the age of 25. And that also encouraged, even if, I mean, it was just a few months to the election, we also saw a lot of youths putting out interest to be a part of the system now, not just voters, because we have over 51% of the entire 85 million registered voters, eligible voters, as youths. So they are also going to be deciding the country's future. I'm talking about electing the leaders. We also see a lot of them running for key positions, maybe not from, I mean, the presidency, but we, because we actually see that out of 72 candidates, the main, you know, candidates are the APC and the ruling, the PDP, but we also have many of them encouraged to participate. They might not surface in this election, but they have been involved, and we're seeing that as a trend that is about to change in the near future. So yes, they definitely will make a huge impact in the elections coming forward.
It's a very encouraging trend indeed. Deji, I want to come back to you just very quickly. We have heard some worrying reports of a fire incident at the Electoral Commission's office. Can you tell us a little more about this?
Well, Lindy, the latest incident actually happened in Anambra State. Anambra State is in the southeast of Nigeria. It happened in the state capital, Awka, and the building affected is owned by INEC, as we understand. It's a building that actually houses materials that are to be used for Saturday's election. And what is actually worrying and what is coming true from that incident is that most of the items or materials affected are card readers. Card readers, very crucial for this election. They're supposed to be used, you know, for the accreditation of voters. And now, if those card readers are badly burnt, then it means it's something serious. So we just have to wait and see if INEC is able to replace them as quickly as possible before the elections. But what we understand is that some very sensitive materials like card readers were burnt, PVCs were burnt, and of course, Lindy, as you're aware, it's not the very first incident we've had recently. We had two not quite long ago, one in the north of the country, another in the south-south. In the southeast also, a state called Abia State. But in those two states where we had the previous fire incident, what we were told were affected were PVCs, that's voter cards that had not been collected. But in this case, we're having a situation where card readers are reportedly destroyed, then that is quite worrying. We just have to wait and see how INEC responds to this. We've not gotten any information at all from INEC, but the state resident electoral commissioner in that state has actually spoken. He said they're actually still doing a damage assessment. At the end of the day, they'll be able to tell how much materials were affected, and then we have to wait to hear from INEC how quickly those materials can be replaced before the election on Saturday. Lindy?
Indeed, because of course, as you said, Deji, not the first incident of this nature, but we certainly hope that so close to the elections that this is indeed the last. Thanks so much to Deji Badmus and of course Phil Ihaza, both joining me there from Nigeria. Now, the Commonwealth Observer Group is currently in Nigeria for the country's elections that are scheduled for Saturday. The group will be deployed to various regions of the country to observe preparations for polling day. Now, earlier, they met with the chairman of the Independent Electoral Commission in the capital, Abuja. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has more.
The Commonwealth Observer Mission to Nigeria, led by former Tanzanian President Jakaya Kikwete. Their meeting with the Independent National Electoral Commission is crucial, coming just days away from the country's general elections. A similar mission from the Commonwealth was in Nigeria for the 2015 elections. Part of their 32-point recommendation was to review the accreditation and voting system, requiring voters to be in the polling units for the whole day.
The last Commonwealth Observer Mission recommended that we should abolish that archaic system, that as citizens or voters are accredited, they should be able to vote at the same time. And we have implemented this recommendation way back in January 2016 when we conducted one of the governorship elections in this country. Since then, we have conducted 194 off-season elections, and all have been conducted on the basis of simultaneous accreditation and voting.
Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa and a key member of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth has a long tradition of supporting the nation's democratic development through election observation. This will be the 6th time a Commonwealth Observation Group will be observing elections in Nigeria since 1999. Recently, one of its recommendations, Not Too Young to Run Bill, was signed into law, creating room for the younger population to vie for political offices. The role of observer missions in Nigeria's electoral space is absolutely key. Previous elections have been marred with irregularities and fraud. For many here, their presence would go a long way to maintain some level of caution among key players who are being keenly watched. That's not all. Their recommendations too, if and when implemented, could further strengthen the electoral process. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, Saturday's election in Nigeria sees incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari making a second bid for power after a first term that was marked by economic instability and the president's own poor health. However, his promise to tackle the Boko Haram insurgency is what might secure success at the polls.
He is the first opposition leader to defeat a sitting Nigerian president. But President Muhammadu Buhari's first term has come with challenges. Buhari has been battling a long-term illness. Between May 2016 and mid-2017, Buhari was in London for medical attention. This has led to debates on his ability to run Africa's most populous nation. The talk on his health has almost taken a personalized angle. However, the incumbent president feels that he has delivered on most of his promises and would like to do more when re-elected.
We are committed to deepening the work we started this first term, such that nation's assets and resources continue to be organized and utilized to do good for the common man.
Buhari was elected on the wave of a biting Boko Haram insurgency that saw many people killed and hundreds of thousands displaced. He promised to tackle the militant group.
I vote for Buhari because he has improved security. Before, we couldn't even go to school.
The people are suffering. You can see that the economy has collapsed because there's high inflation, and life was easier before Buhari arrived.
But Nigeria's economy is still struggling, and the Boko Haram threat still exists. As Nigeria's election draws near, President Muhammadu Buhari believes that his achievements will be his voice, a voice that will compel the Nigerian electorate into granting him another term in office. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Uganda's health ministry fears more than 10 people could have contracted Ebola. And Egypt wants to be one of Libya's main reconstruction partners.
84 million registered voters, 73 presidential candidates, 1 seat. Join us on CGTN Africa for comprehensive, in-depth coverage of Nigeria's presidential elections.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. We start in Uganda now, where the country's health ministry fears more than 10 people could have contracted Ebola after they moved the body of a man suspected to have died of the disease across to the eastern part of the country. This as Uganda's government continues to use all means necessary to prevent the spread of Ebola. Here's Leon Senyange with more.
The Ministry of Health says a team has been dispatched to eastern Uganda to take samples from the body of a man suspected to have died of Ebola and also carry out a proper burial to ensure there are no risks of spreading the disease. The deceased was a 46-year-old man who had been frequenting the DRC for the past 8 years. His last visit was in July last year. He passed away last Friday in Bunia, Eastern Congo. 13 of the deceased relatives came in contact with the body as they moved it from Bunia Hospital in Eastern DRC to Peta in Eastern Uganda. More than 500 people have so far died in the DRC in the latest Ebola outbreak. Leon Sanyangi, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now to news on Libya. Calls for international solidarity on Libya continued, with the African Union proposing an international conference on the North African nation. The UN also wants to hold a session to agree on a national agenda to rebuild the fractured nation and spell out a path to elections. However, analysts from both Libya and Tunisia assert that holding elections in 2019 is unrealistic. Here's Adnan Chouachi with more.
The Tunisian president reiterated at the 32nd ordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union his country's support for a peaceful solution to the Libya crisis. Beji Qaid Sipsi announced his support to the UN and AU project to hold a new Libya peace conference.
The peace process in Libya is a priority for the AU and Tunisia. The Libyan cause is a Tunisian cause because we are both affected by what happens next door. Tunisians and Libyans are one people in two countries. Therefore, pushing towards stability is our goal in Libya.
Many Libyan analysts believe that the African Union's efforts are not sufficient to resolve the 8-year-long Libya crisis.
The African Union must bring all Libyan stakeholders to the negotiating table and build consensus among politicians, tribal leaders, as well as the army and the security forces. This is impossible nowadays in Libya. The situation is chaotic, and no one is willing to make concessions even for the AU.
Experts on Libyan affairs argue that the UN failed to establish permanent peace in Libya and to organize elections in 2018. As a result, holding elections in the North African state will be very difficult this year. The UN Secretary-General met with the Tunisian president in Addis Ababa. Antonio Guterres expressed his interest in the Tunisian role in particular, and the role of neighboring countries in general in their efforts to find a solution to the Libyan issue. Tunisia has backed the African leaders' call for international solidarity on Libya. The head of state said during a meeting with UN and AU officials that the situation in Libya affects its North African neighbor at the security and economic levels. Adnan Shawiti, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, Egypt is looking to be one of Libya's main reconstruction partners. Trade and industrial chambers from both nations have signed a protocol to use Egyptian construction material in Libyan projects scheduled to start this April. Cairo is looking to export around $15 billion of construction material to Libya in the coming year. Here's Adal Al-Mahraoui with more.
The Egyptian-Libyan Chamber for Commerce has signed a protocol with the Egyptian Chamber of Construction Material, making Egypt a vital partner in Libya's reconstruction. Libya is rebuilding its infrastructure, and that's a lucrative opportunity for the world of business. It will begin with oil and natural gas pipelines to resume its exportation and the country's main source of revenues. Businessmen here believe Egypt has a strategic advantage.
4 دول عربية فيها إعادة أعمار.
4 countries around Egypt have gone through great wars that have destroyed its infrastructure, that is Iraq, Syria, Yemen and Libya. Egypt is a leading industrial nation in the region. So by nature, our construction materials is a top contender to serve these nations, including Libya. These materials have immense weight. Therefore, Egypt has a competitive edge other than the other nations further away, because transportation costs is immense.
Egyptian companies are eyeing some 15% of the $100 billion worth of projects planned until the year 2020. A joint committee between the two countries is currently investigating the details. The capacity of dedicated production lines for Libyan projects and security in Libya are both under questioning.
There's a great preference for Egyptian products and workers in Libya due to the proximity between the two countries. Nowadays, Libya needs around 3 million Egyptian laborers. If it were not for the fear over their safety, security authorities would have opened the door for free travel to Libya, to work in the markets there. Socially, we are like one nation divided between two countries.
The protocol is expected to be in effect starting April. However, security inspections will proceed to clear all safety issues that have been delaying Egypt's business expansions in Libya.
If implemented successfully, this protocol could be a groundbreaking achievement in the tied-up economic relations between Egypt and Libya. It could open a great window, not just for construction material, but for developers, labor, and a wider selection of Egyptian industries. Adel Mahraoui, CGTN, Cairo.
4 Nigerian women on Tuesday launched a court case in the Netherlands against oil giant Shell for alleged complicity in the execution of their husbands by the military regime in the 1990s. The civil case has been brought by Esther Kiobel, the widow of Barinem Kiobel, who was hanged in 1995, along with writer Ken Saro-Wiwa and 7 others. Backed by Amnesty International, Kiobel said in a statement that Shell has, over the years, continually fought to make sure this case is not heard in court. The women believe that their husbands would still be alive today were it not for the Nigerian government's bloody crackdown on protesters. The Ogoni movement was set up in 1990 to fight against pollution and the destruction of the environment. The 500,000-strong Ogoni community lives on an oil-rich parcel of land on the northern edge of the Niger Delta. Well, let's bring you a little more on this story now. We're joined by CGTN's Jack Parrock in Brussels. Jack, the story, of course, has a very David and Goliath kind of element to it. These 4 women taking on a major oil giant. Just talk us through the details of the case and what we're likely to see unfold in court.
Well, this is a civil case in the court in The Hague, and that's because Shell is headquartered in the Netherlands. That's why it's being heard there. Essentially, it relates to the death of 4 men that were hung by the Nigerian government back in 1995, in November of 1995. They were protesters against the oil exploration, the development of the Ogoni region of Nigeria. They wanted it to remain protected and for the ecosystem to remain protected. Now, one of the men, Barinem Kiobel, his wife Esther, was in court today saying that she was distraught and traumatized and left poverty-stricken by his death. The authorities accused, said at the time that these men had killed four traditional leaders of the tribal region of the Ogoni, and that's why they were executed. 9 men, including Ken Saro-Wiwa, were executed at that time. The women in this case say that they deserve compensation and an apology from the Nigerian government for what happened to their husbands.
Well, certainly one to watch. Thank you so much, Jack Parrock, joining us there live from Brussels. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has sent a congratulatory message to the 32nd summit of the AU. He expressed hopes for the African Union to help Africa unite and achieve even greater success. President Xi also added his hope for China and Africa to build their relations further. His sentiments were echoed by the African Union, with the AU Peace and Security Commissioner praising China's partnership with the continent. The Commissioner also noted the numerous peace and security challenges China has helped address in Africa. Emmanuel Nadodzi, the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, also noted China's efforts in helping build African capacity.
We have been monitoring with satisfaction in many respects the support that the Chinese government has been giving to really promote capacity development in areas of need. We are aware of the hundreds and thousands of scholarships that have been given to African young people to study in China, to be able to return to Africa and help to promote development. So we really commend that.
We have a cooperation that is quite extended and that is quite important in all the areas with China, in the area of health, in the area of infrastructure, in energy, and so there is no area that lacks the will of the two parties to cooperate and strengthen the partnership. And so I can only be happy with the level of this cooperation, and the political dialogue is perfect.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, Nigeria's economy expands at the fastest rate since coming out of a recession despite election jitters. And Somalia ropes in regional support to have its $4.6 billion debt written off.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Nigeria. The country's economy has grown at the fastest rate since it emerged from a recession. Now, latest economic data shows in 2018, GDP expanded by 1.93%, up from about 0.82% in 2017. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, GDP grew by 2.4% in the fourth quarter. Now, analysts who were polled by Reuters forecast growth of 2.1%, predicting slow growth due to the hold-off by investors. Stocks, meanwhile, rose to their highest in 3 months, gaining 1.75% following the release of the GDP data. Higher oil prices also helped Nigeria exit that contraction. Now, the World Bank expects growth to be slightly less than 2% this year in light of the upcoming elections, which have kept investors away. Meanwhile, in Tanzania, foreign exchange reserves have shrunk by about $439.3 million in the first half of the 2018 and 2019 financial year. Now, this follows the country's debt servicing and implementation of several major infrastructure projects. According to a report by the Bank of Tanzania, the country's gross official reserves totaled about $5.04 billion at the end of December 2018. That's down from $5.48 billion at the end of June 2018. Now, despite this drop, revenues are still above the benchmark recommended by the East African Community member states of at least 4 months. An economic review by the bank shows that the account deficit rose to $2.7 billion during the year, up from $1.6 billion on December 2017. This, of course, was attributed to the fall of the value of traditional exports. Now, the divorce deal between Britain and the European Union will not disrupt Kenya's horticulture exports. According to the Ministry of Trade, the ministry gave assurance to players in the sector after latest industry data showed that Kenya's horticulture exports surged about 33% last year. Now, the country earned $1.53 billion last year from the exports. United Kingdom, Holland, Germany, as well as France account for a bulk of Kenya's exports. According to the CEO of Kenya's Flower Council, earnings from the sector are expected to rise by 4% in 2019. Fresh produce exports are a key source of hard currency for the East African nation. Farming is the biggest sector in Kenya's economy, accounting for nearly 30% of annual output and employing more than half of the population. Well, let's head to Somalia now. Regional actors have joined the country in its bid to have its debt cleared. Now, Mogadishu wants international lenders to write off about $4.6 billion, which are owed by international creditors and world countries in a bid to revive the country's economy. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bio tells us more.
The calls were made on the sidelines of the 32nd High-Level African Union Summit in Ethiopia. Government officials and some of the country's international partners met with the African Union Commission to lobby the continental body to add its voice to Somalia's call for debt cancellation. The government is optimistic that international creditors will cancel close to $5 billion that accumulated as a result of decades of conflict that also weakened Somalia's economy.
International financial regulators and lenders want us to increase our revenues and guarantee that the country will not fall again into financial turmoil. As a government, we must show a strong and solid financial progress as a precondition for debt clearance.
Mogadishu says it has introduced financial reforms in recent years, including a modern taxation system. Tax collection last year increased by up to $30 million, with the first quarter revenues highest recorded in decades. Improvements that has won praise from the World Bank.
We, as the World Bank, are able to support the government of Somalia to build on the progress that has been made in both raising revenues in an efficient way for the economy and for government, as well as ensuring that the systems are in place to utilize and monitor the expenditures of government. And these are key foundational elements for any government.
And for the first time in decades, international money lending institutions provided direct funding to Somalia, with the European Union and World Bank providing up to $250 million. The latest donor support also saw an improvement in the country's national budget that rose to $340 million, up from $270 million last year. The latest fund is expected to lead rebuilding efforts of vital infrastructure destroyed by decades of conflict. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, a deepening crisis at the country's biggest money manager, the Public Investment Corporation, is threatening to cast a shadow over the nation's economy. Now, the state-owned entity remains in limbo without a board after some of its members were named during a commission of inquiry for their alleged involvement in corrupt dealings. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu reporting.
While this has never happened before, the resignations were largely welcomed after it emerged that some board members were involved in impropriety and dodgy investments.
So the PIC and the government employee pension funds are two separate entities. One is a pension fund that collects and pays pensioners when they retire. And then we've got an asset manager, which is a separate company that invest on behalf of the pension fund.
The company at the center of the controversy is AO Technology, owned by former BRICS Business Council Chair Iqbal Survey. The PIC dubiously invested over $290 million in the company when it listed on the JSE in 2017. The share price was apparently grossly inflated. The PIC's investment came from the government employees' pension fund, which has angered public workers.
What we are saying, and we've said to the previous ministers, GPF is not government money. That is private money. His role as a minister is to make sure that GPF and the PIC is constituted with the right caliber of individuals who are not tainted, who are not politically connected, people who are there to make sure that we see value out of those particular institutions.
Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has initiated a process to appoint a new board at the PIC, but he's also being pushed into a corner because his Deputy Finance Minister, Mondli Gugubele, who is also the chair of the PIC board, has been named for his alleged involvement in these dubious dealings.
So the biggest risk for the PIC is the political interference that then undermines the governance of a director always acting in the interest of the company, not anyone. So in the case where you have been deployed, your mandate sometimes becomes very waving.
The reputation of the PIC may take time to repair. Big business looking for funding may also have to wait.
Edcon is one of the biggest reg companies. They've got stores across the land in smaller towns and employ thousands of people. And they need financial support. And they were hoping that the PIC will come in. So decisions like those aren't going to be done. Meaning that companies such as Edcon and many others that may require support, those decisions not be postponed. This is going to hurt the economy big time.
The current board will vacate once the finance minister has appointed a new board. Smitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And on the international front, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order launching an initiative to ensure that the country becomes a leader in artificial intelligence. Well, CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King tells us more.
When it comes to AI, the US may be playing catch-up. The US government is asking its agencies, academia and industry to make it a priority. In part, the executive order reads, the United States must drive technological breakthroughs in AI across the federal government, industry and academia in order to promote scientific discovery, economic competitiveness and national security. The US President aims to boost research, investment in AI and develop the workforce to run the machine learning technologies that will power self-driving cars, automated manufacturing and design, and the thousands of industries yet to be developed. Critics say the problem with this plan is that it's vague and has no new money behind it. In contrast, China is already deploying AI technologies for all the world to see. This year's TV extravaganza to celebrate the Spring Festival used AI and augmented reality in ways US TV networks can only dream of. AI hotels, machine learning robot waiters, even AI-inspired newsreaders are all high-profile projects that reflect a national investment priority for China.
The first is to strengthen the new type of infrastructure construction, stimulate the building of the artificial intelligence industry, industrial internet and Internet of Things, and accelerate the pace of commercial application of 5G.
The US, with its technological superiority, is still considered a leader in the AI field, but the US government fears China is catching up fast, and that propelled Trump's announcement. Without naming any individual countries, the executive order says the US must, quote, organize the development of an action plan to protect the United States' advantage in AI and AI technology, critical to the United States' economic and national security interests against strategic competitors and adversarial nations. Healthy competition between the US and China when it comes to the technologies of tomorrow could help spur global innovation. But increasingly, a sort of silicon curtain is descending between the two economies, which is forcing other nations to pick a side when it comes to the technologies of tomorrow. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, we'll examine Tanzania's economy as debt servicing and infrastructure development eats up into the country's foreign exchange reserves. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Linda.
Thanks, Uche. And do stay with Africa Live. We'll be right back after this.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's head to South Africa now, where surfing is a sport enjoyed by the young and old. And thanks to a new initiative called the Surfing Emporium, both the mentally and physically challenged can also hit the waves. Let's take a look.
For Pamela Hansford, catching a wave while surfing is one satisfying thrill. The experience brings back the sweet memories for the 75-year-old Hansford.
To be in the water and to feel the movement again, it's really special.
A year ago, she broke her neck while on a similar sporting fun after a huge wave slammed her into the shore. Pamela is part of the many people with physical and mental challenges who are being trained to surf by the Surf Emporium. The Surf Emporium is an initiative of former South African surfing champion Roxy Davis.
It doesn't matter whether you are an able-bodied surfer or somebody with a disability. I just love watching that wave after wave, the passion and the stoke. So whether it's their 10th wave or 10th time surfing or it's their very first time, whether they are riding foamies in the front line or way out at the back, that joy and the stoke is the same, and it gives me the same goosebumps watching each wave at each session.
The Adaptive Surfing World Championship was started in 2015 by the International Surfing Association. Since then, the number of people with physical and mental challenges who are surfing has surged in the recent past in South Africa. This initiative is open for people of all ages. The young, middle-aged and even the old all converge on the beaches of Western Cape to enjoy a glide on water and ride the waves.
We felt like we were flying. It was amazing. They showed us how to handle him in the water, how to actually hold the surfboard and how to surf behind him, and it was an amazing experience.
Apart from the competitive aspect of the game, surfing is also being embraced as a form of therapy. Jane Kill, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. South Africa looks to put their dominance on display against an ailing Sri Lankan side.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout,